Last year for my Game of the Year list, I did a top 50 in honor of the game UFO 50. It's a game that is comprised of 50 games, and I thought because so many great games came out last year, why not highlight more of them than I normally would? I don't need to just do a top 10. I can show off a bunch of great games, considering I'm generally playing a lot of video games every single year. And I thought that was kind of going to be a one-off thing. You know, UFO 50 came out, it was like, serendipitous, but boy, did a lot of good video games come out in 2025 too. So here's the Wavelengths Top 50 for 2025, baby. Let's do it. I don't know if it's going to be every year that there are always going to be at least 50 great games to talk about in a video like this at the end of the year, but 2025 sure had enough of them. So number 50 for this year is Monster Hunter Wilds. I'm a big Monster Hunter fan. I have been for a long time. I got the first one on PS2 and didn't understand it, if I'm being honest, but then came back to it on the Wii U for Monster Hunter 3U and had a really great time with it, even though I mostly played it solo. And it wasn't until the 3DS ones, 4 and Generations, I think it was, came out that I started playing with my friends online and was like, oh, this is what Monster Hunter is all about. I've been a sicko for it basically ever since. Monster Hunter Wilds is the sequel to Monster Hunter Worlds. It was a pretty big console release. It was kind of an on-ramp for a lot of people to get into the franchise. And Wilds being a follow-up to it, I think was really exciting to a lot of people who had only played World before. I know I had a lot of friends whose entry point was World, and they were stoked to get their hands on a new one. And Wilds ended up being kind of disappointing to a lot of people, if we're being real. That didn't stop me from putting like 40 to 50 hours into it. Like, I still had a great time with Monster Hunter Wilds, even though I don't think it's the best Monster Hunter by any stretch, and I don't even think it's better than World was. It was still really fun, and I still had a good time jumping in with my friends and, killing big monsters. It's a good time. Number 49 is a visual novel that takes like maybe 15 minutes to play. It's called This Game Will End in 205 Clicks. It's basically exactly what it says on the tin. It's a visual novel where you're playing as a villain in a world that is not so dissimilar from Townsville from the Powerpuff Girls, and you are trying to thwart the Powerpuff Girls. And I don't want to say too much more than that. Again, it's really short, so the more I say, the less you'll have to discover for yourself, but it's got a great art style, has some really poignant and also laugh-out-loud dialogue in it. I think you'll like it a lot. Number 48 is Ender Magnolia. It's the follow-up to Ender Lilies, a game that when it came out, a lot of people were like, hey, if you liked Silksong, you should probably play Ender Lilies. And in January, all the way back in January, when Ender Magnolia came out, a lot of people were saying, hey, if you are waiting for Silksong, you're probably not going to get it this year, so you might as well play Ender Magnolia. And play Ender Magnolia I did, and what I found was a really beautiful Metroidvania, great sonically, visually, pulling a lot from, I would say, like the Game Boy Advance era of Castlevania specifically. It's a really wonderful time, and I hope it doesn't just like always get attached to, if you like Hollow Knight, you should play this. I feel like this Ender series, if they keep it going, really could bloom into something great. I think it already has, actually. There were no shortage of great management sims that came out this year. Number 47 on my list is News Tower. It's a game that takes place in New York City, a place that I live, where you're trying to manage a news tower, the titular news tower, in the 1930s. The thing that I didn't realize about it immediately, it took a little while to click, is that news towers' stories, like the actual news that you need to report on and send your reporters around the world to pick up, are all actual news stories that were like printed in real newspapers back in the 30s. There's a lot of fun little management-y stuff about this, not only managing the news tower itself, but also managing your relationships with the various factions around New York City and the world, including like the mob and the government. It's a fascinating thing. I think the only reason it's this low on my list is because I didn't get to put as much time into it as I wanted to, because it kind of came out around GOTY prep. But it's really fantastic. I dig it a lot. Number 46 is another game that came out in January. It's Fly Night. It's a great indie take on Dark Souls that also happens to be solo and co-op and has an art style that I would say was unlike almost anything I played this year, but was a lot like a lot of things I played in the 90s. Fly Night is a Really, really, really wonderful take on this genre. And I think just the fact that an indie team was able to make this solo and co-op and allow your friends to drop in and drop out was a really brilliant choice. I hope this is one that doesn't just like get buried. More people should check out Fly Night, definitely. Number 45 is 2 Point Museum, another management sim. I've always been kind of iffy on the 2 Point games. 2 Point Campus, I think, was the closest I felt. I didn't really connect with 2 Point Hospital. I think mainly just because the idea of managing a hospital was like a little bit too real and a little bit too freaky, if I'm being honest. Like, it was like just a little dark. And 2 Point Museum as a game where you are building up this museum with all of these artifacts, but also assembling your team of people who will go out into the world and retrieve those artifacts and bring them to your museum is very interesting and cool. And as with all the 2 Point games, they end up getting like really off the rails tonally. They start off very silly, but get like wild. Like very quickly, you are managing a haunted museum that is filled with actual ghosts, and you need to find ways to keep the ghosts from interacting with the guests in your museum. It's really fun, and they just added some DLC that basically turns it also into a zoo management simulator, which really feels like just another game they could have made. They very easily could have done 2 Point Zoo, but instead they're doing I think it's called 2 Point Zooseum or something like that. It's very silly. I haven't checked it out yet, but I did download it, and I'm really excited to play it. Number 44, this one's only a bummer because it's this low on the list, but it still made the list. It's Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, a game that I've been waiting for a very long time as a fan of Metroid. I've never disliked a Metroid game, although it is worth mentioning I haven't played Other M or Federation Force, mainly because I didn't want to have my heart broken. And Metroid Prime 4, I wouldn't say I had my heart broken, but it definitely wasn't the game that I kind of thought it was going to be. I think it's really important to separate your own expectations for a thing from what it actually is. Like if you have your own idea of what a thing should be, quote unquote, and then the thing that it is not the thing that you think it should be, it's worth reevaluating like what the creators put on the screen in front of you and saying like, okay, well, even if it wasn't what I thought, is this thing good? Like, do I like this thing? And in the case of Metroid Prime 4, it felt like that clarity wasn't there for me. It really felt like a hodgepodge of the development hell that it went through. Like there were a lot of different disparate ideas kind of thrown into the pot. But at the end of the day, it is also one of the most, if not the most beautiful game on the Nintendo Switch. It is a new Metroid Prime game that I get to play. And for that reason, it still made the list. It's still beautiful and cool. And Samus rocks, dude. Number 43 is Assassin's Creed Shadows. I think Ubisoft thought this game was going to like save them in a way. I always saw the like Assassin's Creed Goes to Japan idea as a break glass in case of emergency concept. Like, you know, when Assassin's Creed really starts to not do so well, all you need to do is make the one that lets you be a samurai or a ninja or something, and people will go wild for it. And I wonder if they waited too long, because I remember people thinking about that when the first Assassin's Creed came out and they announced they were going to be making it into a series. There were immediately people like on forums online asking, when are we going to get the Japan one? And 2025 is the answer to that question that people were asking way back in 2007, I think it was. And I think it's like probably one of the better Assassin's Creed games, especially in this lineage. The only ones I've really connected with here were, I guess, just Odyssey. Odyssey was the one I played the most of. Shadows, I think, is very interesting with its dual protagonists. I like them both. I think they're both interesting and fun to play as. But at the end of the day, like the Assassin's Creed formula, I just don't know if it's working for me anymore. And I don't know if this like open world refresh that they've been doing since Origins has really like fixed a lot of the core problems that Ubisoft seems to have with a lot of their games. But that said, Assassin's Creed Shadows is like an extremely beautiful and good version of this. And if you like this style of game, and there is a part of my brain that still connects to it on some level, you'll probably like Assassin's Creed Shadows. Number 42 is He Is Coming. It's a roguelike auto battler that's like a very, very old school looking RPG. You play as a knight, kind of moving your way around this grid and trying your best to not get killed by various enemies, while also finding equipment that will build you up enough to take on the boss, who they're always telegraphing is on the way. There's always a boss coming. You kind of know immediately. You can check out their stats and like their whole deal. You know who you're going to be fighting, but it's all about, can you build up your equipment to be able to take them on? Can you build a build that will be able to take that specific boss down? And if you do, you have to do it all over again, repeatedly, until you win the game or lose the game. It's really one of those like great, let me give it one more try kind of games. And I think it's one that if they can get it off of just being on PC is going to be a much bigger deal. Like I think this on the Switch would go wild. Number 41 is Ooh. That's 3 Oohs. And in Ooh, you're playing as a little ball guy who is running around in a, I would say, Animal Well style Metroidvania game, where you have the ability to trail a little bomb behind you and use it to either launch you into the air or shoot you forward, or a bunch of other things I really shouldn't give away, because that's basically the whole point of the game, is figuring out your own abilities and seeing what is possible given the tools you have at your disposal. It's a game that does not take very long to finish, which I think is always a godsend. It's a game that kind of gets in and gets out. But so much of it is just based around the idea of everything you need is right in front of you, but do you realize it? I think a lot of people who haven't played Ooh are really going to love it if they pick it up, so check it out. Number 40 is Strange Antiquities. It's the sequel to Strange Horticulture, a game I really loved the year that it came out. Strange Antiquities is a game where you are managing a store that sells strange antiquities. They are things like statues and skulls and weird totems that all have strange powers, and you have a crew of people who will come in and ask you for things based on, ailments that they have, or weird things going on in their house, or like strange problems they have to deal with in their lives, like curses or whatever. And you need to look through your big tome and all of the things you have on your shelf in front of you and figure out which of these strange antiquities is going to solve this person's problem. The problem that you have, though, is that you don't have labels on all of these items and artifacts, so you need to also, based on context clues of the tomes that you have and of the clues that you're being given, figure out, like, what do you even have in your inventory? It's a really fascinating idea for a game. I loved it in Strange Horticulture when it was all plants, and they kind of double down on that in this one. In fact, this game takes place in the same city that Strange Horticulture took place in, which is fun. So there's a little bit of a connective tissue between the two of them. I would recommend checking them both out, but if you just want to check out one, Strange Antiquities is a big evolution on that first one. Number 39 is Lego Party. It's a game that I absolutely adore, specifically because I think there's a lot of people who've been very disappointed in what Mario Party is these days, and Lego Party basically is the answer to that. Not only is it just like a fantastic party game with great mini games that is honestly really pound for pound just exactly what Mario Party is. Like, you're going around, you're trying to get golden bricks instead of stars every time everybody has taken their turn. You do a mini game together. But it's also relatively affordable. I think it's like $30 or $40, and it's also cross-platform with every single platform. I think it's on like everything, including Switch, and you can play online with your friends on any platform. It just feels like it was built from the ground up to be a game that a lot of people really love and play, and I haven't really heard a lot of love for it. But the couple times throughout the year that I've been able to like sit down with my friends in a room and play Lego Party have been a blast. And I hope that more people have that. It actually kind of reminds me of Sonic Racing Cross Worlds, which is a game that a lot of people, I think, played and said, oh, this is what I wanted out of Mario Kart World. Lego Party feels like that, but for Mario Party. Number 38 is Ghost of Yotei, which is a game that, honestly, I think I need to play more of to really form a full opinion about. I've played a couple hours of it, and it still made the list because I really enjoyed what I played, but it didn't connect with me immediately the same way Ghost of Tsushima did. Ghost of Tsushima is, I think, pound for pound, probably my favorite of the like PlayStation Studios games. It felt to me pretty immediately, and I was going to say no shade to Assassin's Creed, but I have to because I also placed this one above Assassin's Creed Shadows, but it just felt like Ghost of Tsushima was everything I've always wanted out of an Assassin's Creed style game. It managed to take that formula, which I thought was old, and make it feel fresh. And Ghost of Yotei I was really looking forward to as a continuation of that. And it did kind of feel like more of the same, which I think might be an unfair read of it. I think I need to give it a little bit more of a shot. The problem that I had with Ghost of Yotei more so than anything is that I kind of knew what I was going to get before I started playing it, and the more of it I played, the more it kind of confirmed that for me. But I think for me, Ghost of Yotei is really going to hit when they eventually port it to PC as like a director's cut or like a full edition, or when they add the multiplayer PvE. Yeah, it's PvE. I forget what it was called. Legends? Ghost of Tsushima Legends, I think is what it was. It's really, really fun, and they said that they're going to include that with Ghost of Yotei, so whenever that comes out, I'm probably going to dip back into it and play it. So maybe I'll regret having it so low on the list, but right now it's number 38, Ghost of Yotei. Number 37 is Wordplay. It's one of many takes on Balatro meets Scrabble that I played throughout the year this year. It's made by Game Maker's Toolkit. Mark Brown, if you know that YouTube channel, and a bunch of other people got together to put this one together, and I think it really hits immediately. I think when you think of Balatro meets Scrabble, there are certain ideas that pop into your head, and of the many different takes on that idea that I've played this year, Wordplay is the one that matches, I think, your expectation as a player the most immediately. I think the biggest issue with this style of game, having played, again, a bunch of them, is really it just comes down to like, how many words do you know? How good are you at Scrabble in particular? I think the funny thing about Balatro is that the better at it you get, the less you care about the poker part of it. And Wordplay, I find that the actual Scrabble part of it, the words of it all, is still the most important part. So I think that's going to be up to you. For me, it made for like a great week of jumping into and out of this game over and over and over again. But yeah, that's Wordplay at number 37. Number 36 is Power Wash Simulator 2, the game I kind of can't believe made the list at all. Power Wash Simulator obviously has kind of become a weird cultural force and has in some ways inspired like a whole other genre of video game that exists now. I never really connected with the first Power Wash Simulator, if I'm being totally honest. It just never really clicked for me. I understand the appeal of it, and I have also watched the TikToks where people are like power washing sidewalks and whatever, but I never really felt the need to do it in a video game. There's something, maybe it's just like being 33 or whatever, but something about turning on Power Wash Simulator 2 immediately worked for me. And I think the moment where I realized that it needed to be on the list and this high on the list is when I played it like split screen co-op with my wife. That was just like a really fun time. We both just kind of fell like rabbit hole adjacent into it and didn't even like really speak or do anything until we were done with the one watch that we were doing. Power Wash Simulator 2 I've seen described as basically like a yearly Call of Duty upgrade cycle version of Power Wash Simulator, where it's just like everything is bigger and better. It's a fascinating thing. Number 35 is a game called Tyrant's Realm. It also came out in January, and I'm going to describe what it is, and you're going to be like, I've played that a million times, but really take a beat and ask yourself if you actually have. It's a roguelike Dark Souls. So you're playing a game that is basically Dark Souls. You know, you have your rolls and you have your big swords and your little swords and all these different builds and stuff. And the game is generating dungeons that you're making your way through. And at the end of every dungeon is a boss fight. It is very, very, very literally that idea with like no wiggle room or shift outside of it. And I find that a lot of the other takes on a Dark Souls roguelike that I've played in the past have tried to come up with like kind of bigger, more grandiose, inventive ideas outside of that to kind of differentiate themselves from just that like very core concept. But Tyrant's Realm almost unflinchingly like strides headlong into it and is great. It does a really good job. Think about how good that game needs to be with that pitch to make the list at all, you know? Tyrant's Realm is a game that is pretty short. Like, I think if you're good at Dark Souls games, you'll kind of get your feet under you very quickly. They have updated it a couple times since I've last played it, so I haven't checked it out again since. But if I recall correctly, it's like $5 or maybe $15 or somewhere in that vicinity, and already has a lot of great stuff on offer. I think a lot of people should check it out. Tyrant's Realm. Number 34 is Everybody's Golf Hot Shots. I don't even know how to describe the like weird intellectual property ownership of it all between Everybody's Golf and Hot Shots Golf being, you know, two separate things that are now one thing. And then there's also Clap Hands Golf over in a different realm. There's a lot of stuff going on with this franchise kind of being recreated over and over and over again and all the names merging and whatever. But hey, this is a game that a lot of people didn't really like, if I'm being totally honest. I think specifically they expected more from it graphically. They wanted more visual fidelity. For me, all I really cared about was like, do I have a good golf game on my Nintendo Switch? And the answer now is yes. I didn't really have one, and now I do. And because I do, I've played a lot of golf on my Nintendo Switch this year. I'm not a person who really likes watching golf or playing golf in real life, but video game golf I will always get behind. And that's why Everybody's Golf Hot Shots is on my list and on my Switch. I don't know why that rhymed. That felt so good. Number 33 is Promise Mascot Agency. It's a fascinating video game where you play as a former kind of still Yakuza who gets sent out to this one town specifically to manage a business where you need to send mascots out to various events around town and around Japan. I've seen it described as just like Yakuza, like the game Yakuza, or like a dragon, but only the business simulator part. And I think that's one way of pitching it. The other way that I've described it to other people is that it has a lot of Persona 4 energy. I think if you played Persona 4 and you know about Inaba, like the town that you live in that game in particular, a lot of what this game feels like is a more real-time version of traveling around Inaba. But then imagine that every character you met was Teddy, and that's Promise Mascot Agency. Number 32 is A Dream About Parking Lots. It's a relatively short, I would say, adventure game, not really a puzzle. You're just kind of walking around these big empty parking lots looking for your car while simultaneously managing your way through a bunch of dialogue options because you are in a room with your therapist talking about these dreams that you keep having where you need to find your car. So it's the dream itself playing out and simultaneously the conversation you're having with your therapist about the dream. It's about some interesting stuff, which I don't really want to give away in this. Again, it's very short. It's kind of like this game will end in 205 clicks, where the more I tell you about it, I think the more it'll start to give away. But the game starts off like very simple. You're just like in a mall parking lot looking for your car. And as you continue going through these dreams, they get a little bit more dreamlike in terms of its dream logic. But it goes in some very interesting places. And I found it really affecting in terms of, I don't know, just its ideas about like art and how we make our way through the world. It's asking big questions and is worth checking out. It's A Dream About Parking Lots. Number 31 is Digimon Story Time Stranger. It's a new RPG in the Digimon world that is pulling very obviously from Persona 5 and is doing it to great effect. There are a lot of games that have come out since Persona 5 that are very clearly inspired by the success of Persona 5, and Digimon Story Time Stranger is a really interesting concept, first and foremost, which is that Digimon are seen kind of as like cryptids in this world. They show things like, you know, the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot and stuff are actually just Digimon, but most people don't know they exist except for you. You're a person who tracks down Digimon in the real world and tries to send them back to the Digimon world. The Digi world? I forget what it's called. Either way, the game has a pretty hardcore inciting event, and I would say the first 10 to like 15 hours in classic Persona fashion are pretty slow, and they don't really put their best foot forward. But at the end of the day, in terms of a game that came out pretty much like, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks before Pokemon Legends ZA, I think really plants a flag in the ground as showing why the Digimon games should continue to exist alongside Pokemon games. They're going after a completely different thing, significantly more beautiful visually, if that's a thing that you care about. But in general, I think there's a lot of real inventiveness in Digimon Story Time Stranger, and it's a game that I'm probably going to be just chipping away at slowly over the course of 2026 as well, because I'd like to see it through. It's a really interesting thing. And also, I don't know why it's not on the Switch 2 yet. It really feels like it should be on the Switch 2. It's got real Switch 2 energy. Number 30 is Tavern Keeper, yet another management sim. I played this one initially during the Steam Next Fest demos and was charmed by it basically from go and immediately pre-ordered it. I was very, very, very stoked about it. If you've played anything like the 2 Point games, for example, this really feels like a 2 Point take on running a tavern, but it's a fantasy world tavern. So there are zombies and dragons and heroes who need to slay dragons. One of the first places that you can start out in the demo at least, is, you know, basically the Shire. But the first place they actually give you to manage in the main game is a swamp that's like Shrek adjacent. And you need to work your way up through all these different taverns until you can, run a Shire style tavern. It's very charming. It is very funny. There's like a million jokes a minute in there, but at its core, it's just like a really good management sim. Number 29 is Metal Garden. It's a relatively short first-person shooter with an art style that is pulling from like the late 90s, early 2000s, and I've described this game as like Dune adjacent in terms of them just like throwing you into this world without much context for why you're there or what you're trying to do, and just through context clues, picking up, little notes here and there, the enemies that you need to fight, et cetera, you'll start to piece together what's going on. But alongside that, despite it being very, very purposefully gray, there's some real beauty here. There's like a real understanding of like cinema in some of the shots that are set up while you're, walking through some of these spaces. There's some fun like puzzle elements in here. There's some fun upgrades and like obviously great guns and stuff that you pick up. But a lot of this game, more so than anything else, is just about the vibe. It's just about the tone. And I think if you watch a trailer for this and you get behind the tone, there's no reason you shouldn't pick up and play Metal Garden. Number 28 is Super Mario Mon. It's a total conversion mod for Pokemon Emerald that has you playing as Mario and capturing and using Mario creatures to battle. All of the gym leaders are now other characters from Mario. It is very funny. It's amazing that it exists in the first place. And I would say it has one of the most interesting takes on Waluigi I've ever seen in a video game. Number 27 is a game that really took off, was obviously very popular, and is simultaneously like a shitpost. Like it feels like a whole video game shitpost. It's Megabonk, which is a basically just 3D third-person take on Vampire Survivors, just packed to the brim with like brain rot memes. I find that half of it is not really enjoyable. It's like more off-putting than anything. I know that some people really connect with that. Like some people are totally into it. For me, though, the thing that actually connected with me about Megabonk was just the idea of the third-person 3D take on Vampire Survivors. I've always found that Vampire Survivors like needed one extra thing for me to feel like really connected to it, and that's what Megabonk does just by making it 3D and adding a jump button. Like that actually was all I really needed to connect with this genre in such a big way. There are other games I've played in this sphere that are kind of doing a similar thing, but Megabonk like really worked for me in a way that I wasn't expecting it to. I dumped a lot of time into it, and I probably will continue to dump a lot of time into it. It's really fun. Okay, last game before we get into the top 25, and this one's going to be maybe a bit shocking to some people who don't know me that well. It's Clair Obscur Expedition 33 at number 26. I should have made it number 33, but it's number 26 in my heart of hearts. Clair Obscur is a game that I really enjoyed when I first started playing it, and then the more of it I played, the less I liked it, which, from what I understand from the people who didn't really connect with it, is not that uncommon. I think a lot of other people felt the same way. I especially didn't really connect with the ending that much. Clair Obscur, though, I think as a first outing from Sandfall Interactive, is an extremely competent, well-built RPG. I really love the world. I love the inventiveness of it. Where I started to fall apart specifically was what it was trying to do kind of mechanically with like the Pictos building, with every character being kind of their own little video game. It just kind of didn't work for me in the long term, but I am still there day one for whatever Sandfall makes next. Like I am very interested in whatever their next game is. Even if it's just a sequel to Clair Obscur, I will probably check it out anyway. It's an interesting thing. I know it's a lot of people's number one, but for me, 26, baby. Here we go. Top 25. Number 25 for me is Tiny Bookshop. It's a game where you run a tiny bookshop. It's a little bookshop on wheels that you hitch to the back of your cart, and you drive around a town that is not so subtly Boston. I think it's called Bookston, if I'm remembering correctly. And you just need to buy a bunch of books and stock them, and make sure that the books that you're stocking are conducive to the places that you decide to park your bookshop around this town on a daily basis. So if you're, by the port, for example, most of those people are going to want to read books about travel, so make sure you have a lot of travel books, et cetera, et cetera. The hidden quality of this game that really made it skyrocket up my list the more of it I played. First of all, I just think like the loop is basically perfect. Like the video game loop itself of, the buying books and selling books of it all, organizing and decorating your bookshop is really great. I've really loved all of that. But really the secret sauce are the characters, which I was really surprised by. I didn't even know there was going to be an element in this game, but so much of this game is about meeting the people who live in this town and befriending them and helping them out with, whatever struggles they might be having, or they'll help you with whatever struggles you might be having. It's a really really like heartwarming video game, and adds a whole new layer to this kind of business management game that I had never really even thought I wanted. Like it was never something that had occurred to me until I started playing Tiny Bookshop. And one of the first scenes you have after your first month is you and all of the characters you've met so far at a bonfire on the beach, just kind of like hanging out and talking about the things you want to do in the future. And it was really touching in a way I wasn't expecting. I think this game is fantastic, and it's also helpful if you've read a lot of books, because all of the books in the game are real books. So if somebody walks into your shop and they ask you, I want this kind of book that's about this and this, and that is kind of describing Moby Dick, and you've read Moby Dick before, you could just hand them Moby Dick, and that's pretty cool. Number 24 is Story of Seasons Grand Bazaar. Another in a long line of Story of Seasons remakes of Harvest Moon games, kind of like Everybody's Golf Hotshots. Story of Seasons and Harvest Moon and Rune Factory have kind of like flipped around in terms of who owns what. But the Story of Seasons team has been remaking Harvest Moon games for the past couple of years, every once in a while also making their own and throwing that into the mix, which I think is always going to be more interesting. But the most interesting thing that they decided to do this year was to remake everyone's least favorite Harvest Moon game, which was Harvest Moon DS Grand Bazaar. They remade it for all platforms as Story of Seasons Grand Bazaar, and specifically built it from the ground up to make good on the initial conceit of Grand Bazaar on the DS, which was you have this farm. Unsurprising. It's like every other Harvest Moon game. You have this farm, you can go around and talk to all these people, in the town and build up these relationship meters, et cetera, et cetera. But most importantly, every single week, there is a big bazaar that is thrown, and that's where you will make the most money, because people come from all over the world, not just in your town, to buy things from this bazaar. So if you can grow rare stuff or find rare stuff, you can sell it at this bazaar, and the bazaar game itself is really fun. Like, the act of selling things at the bazaar is exhilarating. It's a really great time. I think for that reason, because they were starting off with like kind of an imperfect mold and trying to make it as perfect as possible, they ended up making, in my opinion, the best Story of Seasons game. It's the one that connects with me the most. And it's not just because of that, but also like the characters are fantastic. I love basically all of the, I had to think about it, but I love basically all the characters in this game as well. It's a great entry in this genre and also in this franchise. I think it's awesome. It's Story of Seasons Grand Bazaar. Number 23 is Donkey Kong Bonanza. It's a game that like maybe saved everybody's opinion of the Nintendo Switch 2. I don't think the Nintendo Switch 2 is ever going to fail by any stretch, but it's definitely a console that people were like questioning the reasoning behind when it launched with basically just Mario Kart World. Donkey Kong Bonanza coming out a month later, I think really showed people like why this console needed to exist, and feels really like the actual launch title for this thing. I think when you look back on 2025 years from now, people will look back and say like, oh yeah, the Nintendo Switch 2 launched with Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza. They won't talk about that 1 month period where everyone was like, what's up with this thing? But to talk about the game itself, Donkey Kong Bonanza is just like a fantastic new weird entry into Nintendo canon. You know, it's them taking Donkey Kong, a character who has had many outings over the years, and deciding to reinvent what his kind of game can be again. And in this case, the answer to that question is it's a game where 3 of the face buttons on your controller are all punch. And doesn't that just make a whole lot of sense for Donkey Kong? I think it's perfect. It's a really fun, exhilarating game. I think the reason it's this low on the list, it's not higher for me, is like it just feels like overload at times. The way people talk about Vampire Survivors and games like that is kind of how I feel about playing Donkey Kong Bonanza. The thing that really worked for me, though, more so than anything, which is kind of ironic because this is the team that made Super Mario Odyssey as well, is like the more Mario style platforming levels. There are these like kind of challenge levels that you can find your way into every once in a while, where they will like give you a specific power or ask you to do a specific thing, and they will hide bananas on that stage, and you just need to make your way through and find them there. Those are the things that really connected me with this game, more so than the actual like traversal of the open worlds. As inventive and fun and weird as I found them, it was those challenge levels that like really worked for me. Donkey Kong Bonanza, great game, and it's number 23 on my list. Okay, number 22 is a game I really never thought would exist. It's Fantasy Life I, The Girl Who Steals Time. It's a sequel or follow-up, I guess, to Fantasy Life, a game for the Nintendo 3DS, which is pound for pound like one of my favorite 3DS games, if not my favorite. Fantasy Life is a game where you are a person in a kind of medieval fantasy town, and you can just take on all of these different jobs, from like knight to archer to chef to woodsman to whatever, blacksmith, and just live out all of these lives, and build up all these little meters with all these little stats for each individual job. But then all those jobs kind of feed into one another. So if you're a really good blacksmith, you can make better sword for yourself when you're a knight and you charge out into the wilderness to go fight enemies and whatever. It's an amazing loop. It is so calming and chill and great, and I loved it on the 3DS. And the idea of a sequel was like mind-blowing to me. I really never thought we would get one. And what they did with Fantasy Life I in particular that really, I think, drove it home for me. So they obviously, bring back all of the lives from the first game, but then they add a couple on top of that. But they also add this whole extra layer that's just Animal Crossing. Like a thing that I ask all the time, and I have asked many times on this show, is like, where are the Animal Crossing likes? I'm just surprised that there aren't more, and more companies aren't like trying to set out to make a game that's like Animal Crossing. And they did that. Level 5 did that with Fantasy Life I. The more of this game you play, and it's kind of surprising how long it takes like 10 to 15 hours to get to this point. But when you get to this point, Fantasy Life I basically turns into one half Fantasy Life and one half Animal Crossing. And that rocks. I mean, like, it's a game that I will just jump into and out of all the time. The biggest problem that I have with this game is the same problem I had with the first game, which is that it's almost too calming, and every time I play, I want to fall asleep, which is a blessing and a curse, I think. Number 21 is Voidbreaker. It's a really fast-paced first-person shooter roguelike. It's a genre that we've seen time and time again, and once again, I will ask you, how good must this game be to be number 21 on my list? Voidbreaker is a game I dumped a lot of time into and found to be really impressive. It's a follow-up from the team that made the Entropy Center, which is an indie take on Portal. And Voidbreaker takes place technically in the same world, and there is some carryover, like lore-wise and story-wise, between those two games, which I wasn't expecting at all. I wasn't expecting to get rewarded for playing the Entropy Center the way I was. But Voidbreaker by itself, if you've never played the Entropy Center, is just an extremely competent, well-built first-person shooter that has a great roguelike hook to it. One of the things that I think really works about this game for a lot of people who I've talked to who have also played it is the idea that your gun can be modded with various modifications that are increasingly wild. And the game is, in the best roguelike fashion, asking you to break it over and over and over again. So you can get, for example, a mod that makes it so instead of bullets coming from your gun, they come from the sky. Stuff like that. Definitely check it out if you're interested in this kind of game at all, and you'll be happy you did. Number 20 is Pokemon Lazarus, yet another Pokemon ROM hack. Pokemon Lazarus is unique in that it is a fully ground-up new Pokemon game. It's a mod, technically, of Pokemon Emerald, but it has a new art style, takes place in a new region, and has a completely new story with new characters. The region is based off of Greece, and the game itself is just riddled top to bottom with great quality of life features, but also is telling like a very, I would say, like Nintendo Game Freak adjacent for its time story in the Pokemon universe, which is really interesting. You play as a character who starts at a university, like a research center, and your job is to just go out and research Pokemon, and take on the gym battles around this region in Greece, the Ilios region. You're just going to have a great time doing it. It really feels like an alternate universe game that Game Freak could have made in this era, which is basically the highest praise I think you can give a Pokemon ROM hack. There are so many of them that come out and are trying to do this. They try to take place in a new region, they build a new story, et cetera, but there's something about it that doesn't really capture that magic, or it feels fan fiction adjacent, which isn't a bad thing, to be clear, but I don't think it's what these creators always set out to make. And what Nemo622, the creator of Pokemon Lazarus, did here is like they just made a game that Game Freak could have made, and that's kind of miraculous. If you like miss this era of Pokemon at all, definitely check out Pokemon Lazarus. The reason I knew this was happening in the first place is because I think it was last year they made Pokemon Emerald Sea Glass, or it might have been 2 years ago. Pokemon Emerald Sea Glass, which was a basically just a ROM hack of Pokemon Emerald that added a new art style and a bunch of new quality of life features and some new story elements here and there. That was really fresh and really refreshing, and it just immediately kept me on the lookout for anything this developer went on to do next. And Pokemon Lazarus is an extremely ambitious follow-up that is extremely successful. I love it. Number 19 is The Seance of Blake Manor. It's an investigative game in the style of maybe like Return of the Obra Dinn, if you like that game, where you are tasked with figuring out why someone went missing or how they went missing in this manor that just happens to be hosting a very large seance, as the name implies. I think the thing about this game immediately that really stuck with me was like basically immediately as soon as you walk into the manor, you will see a ghost. They're not shy about the fact that like there's paranormal stuff happening in this manor. And that is, I think, one of the boldest things you can do in a detective style game like this, because you as the player and technically like as the detective will always be looking for logical reasons for, why things are happening, why things are moving around or, whatever. Like the hauntings can't actually be hauntings, right? But in this game, they make it very clear very immediately, like, yeah, the place is haunted. There are ghosts, and this seance like might work. And I don't want to say too much about like what your actual task is in this game outside of just like finding where this one missing woman went. But it goes in some very interesting places, has an unbelievable art style, and has this really great mechanic where time is only moving forward whenever you are taking active steps in your investigation. So like if you decide to question somebody, that will move the clock forward. If you decide to look at an object, that will move the clock forward. And everyone who's in the manor is on a specific schedule. So it's asking you to like really keep track of where people are at what time of day, who they're talking to, and whether or not it's worth talking to them. It's a really interesting video game, and I like it a lot. It's number 19 on my list, The Seance of Blake Manor. Number 18 on my list is Baby Steps. It's a game where you play as a man who gets thrust into an almost Skyrim-adjacent open world, and you are asked to just climb a big mountain, dude. The hitch here, the catch, is that the game is by Bennett Foddy and friends. And if you know anything about Bennett Foddy, going all the way back to the days of QWOP, you know that his whole deal is making games that are like physics nightmares, is maybe a good way of putting it. They almost feel built from the ground up to like go viral on the internet. And Baby Steps is no different. The trigger buttons on your controller is how you control Nate's left and right legs and feet, and it's how you move your way through the world, which means that if you're pressing the wrong button at the wrong time and you're not taking steps in the way you're supposed to be, you will be falling a lot. And boy, did I fall a lot while playing Baby Steps. Oh my God, it was so frustrating and continues to be frustrating. I still haven't beaten it, but very quickly I started to pick up what the game was putting down thematically. I think there is a version of this game that was very mean-spirited, and this one is not that. Despite being very funny, it is definitely a game with like larger thematic ambitions. That's not so dissimilar from Foddy's other work specifically, but I think explored in this way really worked for me and continues to work for me as I continue to make my way through it. Will I ever do the Man Breaker? I don't know. We'll see. Number 17 is Unfair Flips. It's a game where you need to flip a coin until you get heads 10 times in a row, which is a thing that is not statistically impossible, but is a thing that is statistically very improbable. The nice thing is that every time you get heads, you get a little bit of currency that you can spend on upgrades that will make it more likely that you flip heads every time you flip the coin, and will also allow you to do things like speed up the speed at which you can flip the coin, and so on and so on. The thing about Unfair Flips is that it is very visibly putting your chances of flipping heads right in front of you at all times, and is not lying about it. And the game goes as far as like telling you, we're not lying about this. This is exactly your probability of flipping heads. It is a nightmare, and it is extremely effective at doing what it wants to do, which is showing how the human brain is completely warped by the idea of probability. You know, when you see something with a 45% chance, there's a high likelihood that you're going to think that you will land on that 45%, despite that being the opposite of what that percentage chance tells you. It's really interesting to sit there and play it all the way through and ask yourself these kinds of questions. Ask yourself, even, why am I still sitting here playing this game? Which is a thing that I was asking myself a lot when I was playing it for the first time. It's a tough one to make your way through, but also you kind of feel like you can't stop once you've started, which is the greatest trick this game pulls. Unfair flips is a really, really fascinating thing. It took me, I think it was like 45 minutes to an hour. I've seen people beat it as fast as 20 minutes. It really literally is up to the flip of the coin if you beat it or not quickly. So give it a shot. Number 16 is Demon School by Necrosoft Games. It's a game that has been described by a lot of people as like an indie take on Persona, but as I talked about in a recent YouTube video, which you can go watch, it's the ways in which it's not Persona that really makes it unique and interesting. Specifically the way it's using the calendar system. It's not asking you to, min-max your life and look up a guide to see what thing you should be doing on what day of the week, but is instead telling you can do everything that you want on a daily basis. I love the characters in this game. I think they're extremely funny and well written, and it's just like one joke a minute. I know some people who don't really connect as much with the humor in this thing, but I definitely did. And I also love the combat. It reminds me a lot of like Radiant Historia, or even Fire Emblem Three Houses, with the ability to rewind and be able to try stuff over and over again. The game I've compared it to the most in terms of its combat is Into the Breach. I just find that this like style of strategy game, specifically like turn-based strategy game where you are setting up all of your moves and seeing how they'll play out before you commit to them, is one that is like really welcoming. And it feels like the kind of game that I would point a lot of people to if they were like new to the genre in general. I think Demon School is extremely successful at so much. I love it visually. I think the music is great. Play Demon School. Number 15 is Nubby's Number Factory. It honestly, I think, is a satire of roguelike games. It's a pachinko-style roguelike where you need to get a certain score or the sun explodes. The whole thing looks like Kid Pix or that like Windows 95 pipes screensaver. It's kind of nightmarish, and also is a game that I absolutely could not stop playing. Like, I just couldn't put it down once I had started playing it. I absolutely loved my time with Nubby's Number Factory, and I made a video about this one as well where I talked about my time having COVID and also playing this simultaneously, which was like weirdly a match made in heaven. Obviously you don't want to get COVID ever, but if you do for some reason, Nubby's Number Factory like might be the game that you should play. I had a really good time with this one. Like I said, I do think it's a little bit of like a satire of roguelikes, the number goes up mentality, and the way the items and upgrades are named and synergize with one another just feels like the game is constantly laughing at you and the genre. But as all great satire does, they just like made a great roguelike alongside of it. Like at the end of the day, even if it is all nonsensical, it does all click together and works. And that's why Nubby's Number Factory is so high up on the list. Number 14 is Detective Instinct, Farewell, My Beloved. It's a visual novel that's pulling from things like Phoenix Wright, but more specifically Famicom Detective Club, a series of games that I'm really growing to become a fan of. Famicom Detective Club have been around since the NES, the Famicom, and were remade recently for the Nintendo Switch. The two main games that people really loved from the Famicom got remade from the Switch, and I played them and I thought they were pretty good. But there was one that came out either last year or 2 years ago called Emio the Smiling Man. It was a new entry in the Famicom Detective Club series that really made me like click with Famicom Detective Club as an idea. So I was just scrolling through TikTok one day and saw a TikTok from a studio that was like, we have a Famicom Detective Club style game coming out this year. It's called Detective Instinct, Farewell, My Beloved. And I just loved the look of it. I loved the music. I loved basically everything about it. And when I started playing it, it really is like a combination of those two things, and like also, like Hotel Dusk on the Nintendo DS. I think like sonically, this is the thing I was most impressed by. Like sonically, I think it has one of the better soundtracks I've heard this year, but also just feels like an extremely competent and confident first entry in what could be a long-running series if this team wanted it to be. If they want to move on and make something else, cool, totally fine. But I would just keep playing Detective Instinct games for as long as they made them if they wanted to. It feels like the kind of thing that the more of them they make, it could just get bigger and bigger and bigger as people start to latch onto it. I really love this game a lot. And if you like the style of game, you definitely will too. Speaking of visual novels, number 13 for me is the 100-line Last Defense Academy. It's a holy matrimony between the creators of Zero Escape and Danganronpa, and is a game where a bunch of kids wake up in a school, an academy, and are told the world is ending and you're the only people who can save it. It is not a Saw adjacent, Zero Escape adjacent, Danganronpa adjacent killing game the way you would think it is, but there is a character in the game named Darumi who really wants it to be. But it is a game that is filled with a lot of horrors as all of these kids realize what they need to accomplish to be able to save the world, and how they're going to survive the 100 days that they need to before they're allowed to go home. This is one of those ones where like I can't really talk a whole lot about how you play it or even what happens in it, but just know that if you like any of those games, or if you specifically, and this is the big one, if you loved 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim as much as I did, this is the 13 Sentinels of this year, definitely, and you should definitely check it out. You will not be disappointed by the 100-line Last Defense Academy. So many games I can't spoil this year. I can't tell you about stuff. What are you gonna do? Number 12 for me is Pokemon Legends ZA, which might be surprising to see this high up on the list, but I really connected with this game the same way I did with Pokemon Legends Arceus. I think pound for pound, like, of the recent Nintendo Switch and on era of Pokemon games, both of these Legends games are the ones that I think are the most successful at pushing the franchise forward, and taking it seriously, quote unquote, and just like asking real questions about this world. I find that Legends Arceus and Legends ZA are really interested in what actual average life would be like in a world where Pokemon exist, which is the question I think most people have asked themselves since whatever the first Pokemon game they played was. For me, it was Red and Blue. Going all the way back to the release of those games, I have always wondered, like, what it would be like to live in that universe. And the Legends games are like primarily interested in asking that. Arceus was asking, like, what was it like before people and Pokemon were even like coexisting in a way that felt natural? And Legends ZA is asking, like, okay, now that we have coexisted for a long time, we're starting to recognize the fact that, like, building up human cities has impacted the environments of Pokemon, and what do we do about that? I think that stuff is really interesting. The funny thing is that, like, the actual narrative plot of this game is not really about that. That's just kind of like the set dressing for what's happening in Pokemon Legends ZA, but all of the, like, secondary, tertiary stuff is where I really clicked with it. I think this is a game where you could just spend hours and hours, and I did spend hours and hours just talking to NPCs and having a good time doing that. And I know that that's not really going to connect with most people, and it clearly didn't, but it did with me. I thought it was fantastic. And I kind of can't wait to see what's coming next from Pokemon. It feels like, you know, from Arceus to Scarlet and Violet to ZA and onwards, maybe I'm being too optimistic, but it does feel like they're taking more chances and taking more risks with this franchise for the first time, maybe since like the Game Boy Advance. So I'd like to see what's next. I think Legends ZA, in my opinion, feels like a step in the right direction. And as long as they keep doing that, I'll still be there. Number 11 is Despelote. It's an autobiography as a video game by the developer Julian Cordero, about what it was like to be in Ecuador in the 90s during the World Cup, while they were like maybe going to qualify for the World Cup. It has just like the most interesting, most inventive visual style of any game that was released this year. I think the writing and the voice acting is amazing. Every like minute of this thing feels like a fresh new idea that could have been its own video game. It's just hard to articulate how impressive Despelote is unless you've played it. But if you play it, you will know within like 8 seconds that it's just like basically a masterpiece. It's really exceptional. I think one thing that really sticks with me about my feeling around Despelote is a couple months after I had played it, I went to the NYU Game Center in New York, where they did this thing called No Quarter, where they get 4 game developers to show up and do like video game installations. And Julian was there with a new game. He was one of the 4 people that got to make a thing, and it was a game where there were people riding city bikes through like a 3D version of Google Maps. And everyone in the crowd needed to shout out the directions to certain places. So it would say like, go to Times Square, and then they'd need to ride on the bike, like actually ride on a real bike towards Times Square, and people would be shouting out directions, and it was a race between 2 people. I found that to be so interesting. I really loved like being in the room and seeing that and watching people play that. And it just kind of made me think even more about Despelote and how much of that game is about like community and the feeling of togetherness, specifically in a space. And the idea that you would also, after Despelote, build a game where a bunch of real people in physical space need to tap into their actual knowledge of where they all live to help each other. Just like really kind of made me think again about Despelote and how interesting and how wonderful its themes are. I loved it. It's good. I can't believe we're at the top 10 already. It's amazing. Last year, this recording took me like 4 or 5 hours or something like that. And this year we're at about an hour and a half. So, it's still been a while, but definitely not as long as last year. I'll say before we get into the top 10, if you want to hear even more about the top 10, you can head over to Into the Aether, where myself and my co-host Steven talked about our top 10s at length for about 6.5 hours, something like that, I think is the final runtime. But I'm still going to talk about my top 10 here. Maybe not as in depth as I did in that episode, but still, I'm excited to tell you about number 10, Peak. Peak is a game that immediately entered a genre that is being referred to as friend slop, which I think was derogatory originally. People were using it as a dunk on a certain style of game where you and your friends would just kind of jump into like usually weird physics sandboxes and play around. I think that the term friend slop has kind of been reclaimed, and now people are like actively seeking friend slop games. And Peak to me is like, no pun intended, but like the high point of what this genre can be. It's a game where you and your friends crash land on an island and just need to climb to the top of a mountain. And when you do that, you go to another mountain and you do it again and again and again. But the entire thing is, silly, wacky physics-based nonsense with proximity chat. So when you are talking to your friends, you can hear them if they're close to you, and you need to like yell louder if you want to hear them further away. But also, if you're in like a cave or something and you speak, it'll like echo and reverberate around the cave. The proximity chat stuff is so important to the success of this game, I think. But also there's like items that are useful and items that are completely useless in equal measure added into this game. So there's like a bugle that you can find that you can play that is just a bugle and like usually probably is not worth having on your person as you're trying to climb this mountain, but also sometimes occasionally will come in handy in ways that are like inventive and strange. This is a game that you're just going to like have a blast playing every single time you boot it up. There's kind of no way to play Peak and not have a fun time. Even just the way it looks is really charming and fun. But as soon as you get past like just what it's doing visually, the physics stuff and the actual gameplay of it are like exhilarating and laugh out loud funny, especially when you're playing with friends, which is what you should be doing while you're playing Peak, my number 10 game of the year. Number 9 feels like a game that was made exclusively for me. It is Ball Pit. Ball Pit is a game by Kenny Sun, who announced this game by saying that it is a mix of Vampire Survivors, Loop Hero, and Hold Down. 3 games I like a lot. Hold Down in particular is a game I play almost every single day. It's like on my phone, and I open it up at least once a day and play it for like even just 10 to 15 seconds every single day, usually a lot more than that. Ball Pit is a roguelike where it's almost like Brick Break meets Space Invaders is how I would put it. You're a little guy on the bottom of a screen and you have to aim and shoot balls towards a bunch of enemies who are coming at you from the top of the screen. And that by itself, good idea. Good loop for a roguelike. But of course, because it's a roguelike and it's a modern roguelike, there is a lot of like upgrading and synergizing and building builds out. And in the case of Ball Pit,
The balls you get can have different effects on them. So they can be spiky and apply bleed damage, or they can like explode into a bunch of little balls when they hit a wall, or they can set things on fire, or they can be a laser that goes horizontally or vertically, et cetera, et cetera. And then you can start to combine all of these balls together and create new unholy objects. And that also would have been enough, but you also can play as a bunch of different characters who all have their own different abilities. So the first one you start with is just a knight who has a spiky ball, but eventually you get ones that are like two characters at once, shooting in different directions, or characters who shoot from the top of the playing field instead of the bottom. And if that wasn't enough, there's also a town building, base building mechanic, which is where you get your permanent upgrades on a run-to-run basis. There's just a lot of video game here. And I ended up eventually rolling credits on it and going into New Game Plus. And I still, every once in a while, boot up the game and play a little bit of New Game Plus. And it's good. It's really good. It's a game where, like, from the minute it was announced, I knew it was for me, and I knew it would probably make my top 10. And then it came out, and it did. And it's as simple as that. I just really love Ball Pit. And, I've talked to some people who consider it to be a little bit too mindless or whatever. But I don't know. There's a lot of really nuanced, interesting game design in this thing. It feels really considered and really tightly built. And I loved my time with it, and I continue to love my time with it. That's Ball Pit. Number 9. Number 8 is Hades 2. It's a game that I was convinced was going to be probably in the top 5, if not number 1, the year that it came out. I think I maybe even said as much last year, because I included the early access in my top 50 last year, which was a little bit cheating. But this year, the full game came out, and I played it and beat it and thought it was great, except for the ending, which I don't want to talk too much about. It's been talked about to death, and they've updated it and patched it as if it was like Mass Effect 3. I don't really think that the new update changes my feelings about the ending. What I will say, I don't want to get into a gripe fest about Hades 2, but what I will say about it is that, when I come to Hades or a Hades 2, what I'm looking for is a marriage of what I'm doing mechanically and what I'm hearing about narratively. And in Hades, I think that blend is perfect. And in Hades 2, I think the narrative really does not work. Which means that at the end of the day, you need to rest more on what's happening mechanically. And thankfully, Hades 2, in my opinion, feels a lot better than Hades 1 mechanically. Hades 1, a game I think is basically perfect. Hades 2 manages to knock it out of the park mechanically, and just make a really solid, fun, great roguelike with incredible combat, great items and weapons and weird stuff. I love the way the boons interact in this game. I love the ability to go up or downstairs to do basically 2 different versions of a Hades run if you want to. There's just a lot to love about this thing. I love the pets. I love the tools. I love a lot of Hades 2. Enough so that it's still in my top 10, even though I really didn't like the story. Who would have thunk it? If you've seen my review of number 7, Mario Kart World, you know that I like this game a lot. I liked it right when it came out, and I asked some questions about it in terms of how it will replace Mario Kart 8 Deluxe as like the go-to Mario Kart that most people play. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe obviously is still a game that you can play on your Nintendo Switch 2. If you get a Nintendo Switch 2, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is there for you and will always be there for you, and isn't that great? But Mario Kart World really feels like it was built by Nintendo to be a replacement for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. And I think the best way of understanding that is just via the free roam mode. Free roam being a thing that you can do while you are like waiting in between races with your friends to just kind of like goof around in, feels to me like an acknowledgement of games like Peak in some ways. Like the idea of, friend slop, as it were, has almost made its way into Mario Kart World via the free roam stuff, which I find very interesting. But at its core, when I was really thinking about where I would place Mario Kart World on this list, at the end of the day, there's so much comparison you can make between this and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Specifically, the difference between what Mario Kart 8 was on the Wii U when I first played it and where Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is now after all of the DLC and booster course upgrades and all this stuff. Mario Kart World is a better foundation for a Mario Kart than 8 was when it first released. but it also, I think, stands shoulder to shoulder with it. Like, I think it is at least as good as Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is to play. Like, it feels largely similar to play, despite them adding, obviously a bunch of new characters and new mechanics and the, knockout tour and the free roam of it all. It just still does feel like a good Mario Kart game at the end of the day. And it feels so good that I started to really ask questions about, like, would it make sense to have a game that is comparable to what I think is the best Mario Kart not make my top 10 this year? The answer is no. Like, of course it would have to make the top 10 this year. And Mario Kart World is, I think, a game we're going to play for like a decade, and they will probably update it the same way they did with Mario Kart 8, realistically. And it'll be fun to see where it goes. I know there's a lot of people who are not stoked about the price of it all, which I think is understandable. $80 is a lot of money to ask for anything, especially a game like this. But, I was lucky enough to get it when it came out, and I got the bundle with the Switch 2. I'm glad I did. And Mario Kart World ended up being my number 7 game of the year. And realistically, a game I'm just going to play for a couple hours at least every single year until the Nintendo Switch 2 goes away. Number 6 is another autobiographical video game called Consume Me, which I adored. It's a game where you play as a high school student, at least at the beginning of the game, she's a high school student. You play as a high school student who is struggling with real life things like her weight and her own self-image of herself, is juggling the various pressures that high schoolers are always juggling, like will I start dating somebody, and what if my grades aren't good, and what if I'm disappointing my parents, and all of this stuff, and turns all of those feelings and ideas into a life sim where every single day you have a certain amount of time and you need to spend that time wisely, either studying or going and hanging out with your friends or working out or whatever. While the game is mainly a meditation on the way unhealthy dieting can very negatively impact your life and your well-being, it is also like a surprisingly joyful, beautiful, artistically like mind-blowing video game. I think the soundtrack in here is one of my favorites of the year. I think the visual style is unlike anything I've ever seen in a video game, and I think is unlikely that we will ever see anything like this again, realistically, unless Jenny decides to make another game like this again. I just found so much of this game to be so singular in the way that an autobiographical thing should be. I think the story is extremely touching. I found myself crying at the end of it. There is a wonderful, almost Breakfast Club adjacent, like, ending credit sequence where you get to see where everyone who was either in the game or worked on the game, like where they ended up in life, which was great. There's just so much goodness in Consume Me, despite dealing with some like pretty heavy stuff. It still felt like the kind of thing that I was like just so thrilled to sit down and play every day while I was playing it. I love it. I love it so much. It's so good, and you should definitely play it if you haven't. This is another one that I really hope like makes its way to other platforms eventually. It's on PC and Mac right now, but I think this is another one that's like a shoe-in for a great Switch release one day. It's awesome, man. It's so good. Number 5 is a true sicko game. It's Sectori. It's a twin-stick shooter, roguelike-y kind of thing that is basically, I would say, just a perfect twin-stick shooter. It's a game, I've said this many times in the past, but it's a game that I think like every time I ask a question about why is this element in the game, why does it look the way it does, why does this sound play, there's always an answer, and the answer is always good. It's about as tightly designed as a video game can be, I think, and is exceedingly difficult in a way that really has me coming back to it over and over and over again. Sometimes there's a version of difficulty that makes me want to just like turn tail and run, and Sectori is not that. Sectori has kind of an inviting masochism to it that makes me want to keep sitting down to try and play it over and over and over again, and maybe score higher on the global leaderboards, which I am always going to be obsessed with. Sectori is a nightmare, and it is beautiful, and the soundtrack is so cool, and I love it, and I play it all the time, and whenever I do, I can't put it down. I think I truly, like, really, if I needed to just like throw a dart at the dartboard here, what I would say about Sectori is that it's a game I'm going to play for the rest of my life. Like, there's no world in which this isn't a game I boot up like a couple times every year, basically forever. Just feels like an immediate staple in my life. Number 4 is Queue Up, another game about flipping a coin. Queue Up was, again, kind of like Nubby's Number Factory, built as a satire. It's a game that asks, what is the perfect version of online matchmaking? Like, what is the perfect esport? In this case, they call Queue Up the future of esports. And what they say is that perfect matchmaking would mean that you and the person you're matched up against have a 50-50 chance of winning. And you never know who is really going to win. So at that point, why not just make it a coin flip? And that's what they do here. You pick from an Overwatch-style list of different hero archetypes, and you get matched up with a bunch of other people actually online, and you need to just watch as a coin is flipped over and over and over again, and depending on how it lands, you and your team win or lose. The interesting thing about it, and where a lot of the satire comes from, outside of just like that conceit by itself, is that whatever hero you pick unlocks a bunch of skills over time. Like, you continue leveling up, and you'll continue to unlock these skills that you put on like a sphere grid, kind of like, Final Fantasy X or whatever. You start to put these skills on a sphere grid, and they start to synergize with one another, and your skills also synergize with the skills of your teammates as well. And eventually you start to not worry so much about the coin flip landing on heads or tails, or Q or up in this case. But you start to care more about like, how many points am I getting for this like meta progression layer that is added on top of it. And the coin flips don't really matter anymore. And it's, I think, really brilliantly executed, because it just reminds me so much of like going all the way back to Call of Duty 4 when that came out, and people wanting to unlock specific perks or specific upgrades for their weapons or whatever. That is what Queue Up is satirizing. And just like Nubby's Number Factory, they ended up making a great video game outside of it. And I think specifically committing to the idea of making it actually a game you can play online with your friends and matchmake meant that for like 2 weeks, my friends and I just played Queue Up basically every night and had a blast doing it. We just like tore through a bunch of the different characters and unlocked as many as we could, and had an amazing time. This is yet another game with one of the best soundtracks I've heard this year, one that is available on Bandcamp, and I bought immediately. I love it to death. Queue Up absolutely rocks. It's worth playing once and then again and then again. It, I think, is like the first true online esport version of an idle game in some ways. I just think I could talk about Queue Up forever. So in this case, I'll just say play it. It's my number 4 game of the year. I like it a lot. Number 3 for me is Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD 2D Remake. I'm a big Dragon Quest freak. I have been ever since I played Dragon Quest 11 for the first time. It made me a real fan of the franchise. I don't really consider myself to be a fan of many things. The idea of fandom in some ways kind of doesn't connect with me. Maybe, honestly, it's because I worked for Marvel for as long as I did, and came into contact with a lot of big like Marvel fans, and also got like death threats from Marvel fans because of my job at Marvel, that the idea of fandom has kind of become less interesting to me. But I am a fan of Dragon Quest. I'm surrounded by a bunch of Dragon Quest paraphernalia and stuff. I have played chunks of, if not all the way through, a lot of Dragon Quest entries at this point. I will endeavor to play all of them at some point in my life. And I found this recent idea of remaking Dragon Quest games to be very interesting. 3 made a lot of sense when they wanted to remake it, because that was like kind of the game that kicked off the franchise being as big of a deal as it was. Like, Dragon Quest 1 and 2 were popular, but Dragon Quest 3 was like a phenomenon. And the idea of remaking it with the Octopath Traveler style HD 2D thing made a lot of sense, adding a lot of quality of life improvements. Because the foundational structure of Dragon Quest 3 like still works today, and just adding like a symphonic score and more beautiful visuals and, a couple extra story elements here and there. That's all you really need to do to make Dragon Quest 3 like more palatable, quote unquote, to modern audiences who don't want to go backwards and just play the original. Dragon Quest 1 and 2 are interesting because they need a lot more work. Dragon Quest 1 basically doesn't have a story at all. Like, it just starts with you in front of a king, and the king is like, hello, there's an evil guy. Go to the four corners of the world, get some MacGuffins, and go fight the evil guy. See ya, and then you don't talk to anybody else basically for the rest of the game. And then Dragon Quest II introduces the idea of a party system, but you don't get to talk to the members of your party at all, and the world is like 5 times as big and is not really filled with much more. So a lot of people have said that Dragon Quest II is like the worst entry in the series, and having played a good chunk of 2, I would agree with that. I didn't really connect with it the way I even did with 1. Like something about the simplicity of 1 still worked for me, and I played all the way through it, and I really loved it. But Dragon Quest II I had to put down after a couple hours because I was like, I just feel like I'm getting nothing from it. So the idea of remaking these 2 games and putting them in one package felt like a really big swing, because it would mean that they would need to add a lot to it. They would either need to add nothing to it and just like allow them to exist the way they were, but again, great art style, new music, some quality of life features, or they go the direction that they did go, which is add a lot more story, a lot more dialogue, way more characters, and also add a connective tissue narratively, making this trilogy more of a trilogy. It's worth mentioning that Dragon Quest 1 and 2 are sequential, and Dragon Quest 3 is a prequel to both of them. So releasing it as 3, 1, 2 actually makes more sense for people who are like new, I guess, to Dragon Quest. I played all the way through Dragon Quest 1 and the HD2D remake and found it to be exceptional. It's a great, basically new Dragon Quest game because they added so much story and so much characterization. It just really feels like a fresh thing. My only complaint about it is that it goes on like 2 or 3 hours too long. Like the pacing gets a little bit rough right towards the end, but for the most part, I think it's like great. And if it's your first point of entry into Dragon Quest, like it's a pretty good one. Dragon Quest 2 though has gone from probably the worst Dragon Quest game to maybe one of the best ones. The character work that they've done with these 3 cousins who party up and try to save the world is it's just extremely successful. It's a game that I play and feel nostalgic for while I'm playing it. It's like inventing new emotions for me to feel while I'm playing Dragon Quest 2. I just think it's stellar. I think on top of all of this, the thing that really strikes me about it is that they've like added a whole new thematic layer to it. Because it's the end of this trilogy, they kind of felt the need to have it wrap up what happens in Dragon Quest 3 and 1. And where they decide to take that in terms of these 3 kids being like, why does there need to be an evil villain we fight every 100 years over and over and over again? Why can't we stop this? Like, can't we make the world better for ourselves and the people who come after us? It's really powerful, and really, I think they explore it in a way that like I wasn't expecting at all. I wasn't expecting this to be good in the first place, and instead, like, we got one of the best Dragon Quest games, and that's amazing. That's like, I feel so lucky to have that. I haven't finished this one yet, but you better believe I'm gonna in 2026. Even just with what I've played, Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD2D Remake is my number 3 game of the year. Number 2 is a game that I really thought was going to be number 1 for most of the year. It's Blue Prince. Blue Prince is a game I have a review of on this channel if you want to watch that as well, if you want to know why I care so much about it and think it's so great. But if you haven't played it at all, it's a roguelike game where you are basically exploring a mansion and trying to find the 46th room in a 45-room estate. If you can't find the 46th room in the amount of time that you are allotted on a daily basis, then you need to start over the next day, and all the walls shift, and whatever layout you have for the manor is erased, and you have to start again. That is like one small facet of what Blue Prince is doing. It feels like our 5 or 6 video games stuffed within Blue Prince, and they're all fascinating and very cool. I think the thing that really strikes me about it, and the thing that the game really doesn't betray or even like hint at really until you beat it for the first time, is that there is like a very rich, interesting narrative that is about some very real stuff that's hidden in here as well. It's a game where you will be sitting there with a notebook, playing and taking notes and thinking about it when you're not playing it. And I remember like walking around Manhattan, seeing things in real life that reminded me of Blueprints, as if I was having the Tetris effect, but for Blueprints. It's a really beautifully clockwork-like constructed video game that also is really important to me, specifically because I got married this year, which is pretty cool. And right after the ceremony that my wife and I had, when we had a couple hours to kill before the next event in our 3-day wedding extravaganza, we just went back to the place we were staying at and we played Blueprints for a couple hours because the two of us played through most of this game together. And for that reason, Blueprints, like, not only is, I think, an exceptional video game, but is like important to me as a totem of what 2025 was all about, which was quitting that job at Marvel, getting married, going to Japan for 2 months, and coming back and starting to work on Wavelengths in earnest, which, those are a lot of really big life shifts that all happened simultaneously this year. Before I even get to number one, I guess, I just am so grateful. I'm just so grateful to be able to do this and to like have this platform and to have you watching, even, I don't even know how long this video has been at this point, but however long it's been, like the fact that you're sitting here and you're watching it means the world to me. And the fact that there are people who like back the Patreon and allow me to do this on a daily basis, like get up out of bed and like be stoked to play and talk about video games and technology and all this stuff, is like, it's literally a dream come true. It's what I've wanted to do since I was in high school, and I can't believe that I'm doing it. Blueprints to me in some ways feels like the kind of stand-in for all of those feelings that I have about it, about my like own life is what I mean by that. God, it's a good video game. Makes me feel a lot of things. I love it. And I love you. Thank you so much. Let's talk about number one. Number one, probably unsurprisingly to a lot of people, is Hollow Knight Silksong. It's another game that I have a video about on this channel that you can go watch. That video started as a review and eventually became more of a video essay, but I do think of it as a review in my heart of hearts. But that said, I mean, this is a game that was announced 2 weeks before it came out. Or I guess the release date was announced 2 weeks before it came out. We knew that Silksong was coming for years, and I had basically put it out of my head as a possibility that I would be playing Silksong this year. There's a certain point over the course of waiting for it where I just got to like, I will believe Silksong is real when I'm playing it mode. And then when it came out and I started playing it, I did not stop playing it until it was over. Those of you who back the Patreon, you can go watch. I have the video of me playing the entire thing front to back, and I couldn't believe while I was playing it that I liked it more than Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight is a game that I have said many times is one of my favorite games of all time. It's like you could flip a coin between that and Dragon Quest XI, and it's going to be one of them. Goddamn, I think Silksong is like now in that spot that Hollow Knight used to be in. Because Silksong not only just feels like you're getting everything you like about Hollow Knight, right? Like Act 1 of Silksong basically is Hollow Knight again, but with, truly better art, better music. Hornet feels better to control than the Knight did in Hollow Knight. There's a lot of like little improvements here and there, but also Hornet is like a more interesting character right off the bat. Like she speaks and has opinions and has agency, and is asking questions and talking to these NPCs who talk back, and there are all of these like side quests and subplots, and there's so much going on in this game. And then when you get into Act 2, it becomes Silksong. Like it's Hollow Knight 2 for Act 1, and then Act 2 is Hollow Knight Silksong to me. And not even to mention what goes on in Act 3, but man, this game just contains multitudes. I've talked a lot about my feelings about Hollow Knight, and maybe I'll talk more about my feelings about Hollow Knight one day, but my feelings about Hollow Knight are basically wrapped up in like, I was in a place in my life where I felt basically worthless, and playing Hollow Knight made me feel like I was worth something again. Not to say that I was feeling exactly that way again when Silksong came out, but I definitely was in a kind of apathetic funk, is how I'd put it. I'd kind of gotten to this place where like I wasn't I wasn't exactly sure of myself and the place that I had put myself in this role, doing exactly what I'm doing now. And I didn't really know what I aspired to after, getting to this point. And playing Silksong really re-energized me and revitalized me and taught me a lot about myself and once again asked me to do hard things and overcome them. And I found it really powerful. And to have that feeling imbued in me from this game on top of the larger narrative thematic questions that this game is asking about, what faith means outside of religion even, it's all extremely powerful, and it hit like a freight train. And I'm just kind of floored that that's what Silksong is. I was not expecting to get such a profound feeling from that game, and I did. I thought at best it would be more of Hollow Knight. I was not expecting what I got, which is one of the best games I've played in my life. I think Silksong is a masterpiece. I kind of can't believe it exists and is what it is. Just like I said about Dragon Quest, I feel very lucky that Silksong is what it is, and that's why it's my number one. And it's a game I could probably talk about a lot more if I wanted to, but boy, have I been talking for a long time already. So I'm going to wrap up here. That's my top 50 for 2025. Oh my God. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you haven't, maybe consider subscribing. Thank you to everybody who backs the Patreon. It means so much to me that you do that. If you don't back the Patreon, maybe consider it. I'm releasing other video stuff all the time. You get video versions of the podcast every week. There's a lot of stuff going on the Patreon if you're interested in it. And while you're at it, go check out Into the Aether, a low-key video game podcast. Check out NPC, Next Portable Console, if you're interested in handhelds and retro gaming. It's another show I do. And go to wavelengths.online. It's the blog that I have. Thank you for being here. And I'll catch you all in the next one, which will be a more normal video, not what this is. Bye, everybody.